Hi, my name is Gibson, and I'm the co-owner and co-creator of the Personal Development School. This is your daily breakthrough video, and in this video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how the anxious preoccupied attachment style confuses love with infatuation at times, and how they can get stuck at different stages of a relationship throughout the relationship life cycle because of some of their expectations around love and what it should feel like and look like, and how this can sometimes prevent them from moving out of the honeymoon phase and into and through the power struggle phase effectively, so that they can then get into the stability and commitment and bliss stages of a relationship. So I'll tell you all about what this means, the different stages, and we'll go through a little bit around strategies and sort of subconscious reprogramming tools to tweak some of the things that are not working. I'll probably do a part 2 for that, but I'm going to start by giving you just a big chunk of information that can be really useful for your self-awareness, for understanding relationships better, and for taking some of the confusion out of the mix. And so as I do this, I'm also going to chat with you a little bit about what love feels like to the anxious preoccupied, okay? And some of the good parts and the not so great parts. Before I start, super quick, we're doing as much as we can to support our community right now. We have membership sales that are going on for if you want to sign up and be a member. We're doing a full money back guarantee on anybody who's unhappy with the content, which we actually haven't had a single person request since we've started the school, or anybody who is, if their financial situation changes or anything like that, like literally our priority is to be here and support everybody. We've got 2 to 3 live webinars a week. So we've got a ton of people on there. It's a community. You can ask your live questions. We have a members lounge. People are doing mastermind groups and breakout sessions from there. Like, this is a great space to bring people together, to connect, and to just have some people around you during this time. And so we're here to support you on this journey. And the coupon code, by the way, is with you, all one word. We actually ran out of them yesterday, so we just updated them today. But a lot of people are coming in here because I know a lot of people are looking for support during this time and the quarantine time. And I'm there in the live webinars to answer your questions, to support you, and to actually go through some of the COVID questions or fears that you guys have, just from a mental, emotional perspective, to, again, just create as much support as possible as we can. So if you guys need anything from me, let me know in the comments, and I will keep trying to show up and accommodate those things for you guys. So let's talk about this for a moment. Anxious preoccupied attachment style individuals, which I'm just going to call AAs, right? Anxious attachment throughout this video, because it's a lot shorter. They tend to think of love as this: infatuation, extreme attraction, a lot of validation, a lot of time together, or clinginess in a way. And the reason for this, it's so important, is because when the anxious preoccupied attachment style was being subconsciously programmed, when this was like being part of their conditioned attachment style, anxious preoccupied individuals often feel unloved when somebody leaves, right? When the parent or caregiver are gone, they perceive this as abandonment and a lack of love, right? If you love me, you would stay. A lot of anxious preoccupied have a core wound of feeling unloved. And so what's the opposite of that? Well, love, if you love me, you're going to stay with me all the time. And so they often see like the expression of love as partially intertwined with an expression of how much time you spend together. And this is why that wire is very easily tripped. It's like, oh, if we're spending less time together, it must mean the love is becoming less. And it's this perceptual filter that the anxious individual sees their relationship through. And it's important to recognize that if you are the anxious preoccupied, because it really helps you position it differently in your mind with that piece of self-awareness. Like, oh, time apart or less time together doesn't necessarily mean the relationship is going downhill. And in fact, less time together is actually almost a rite of passage in the power struggle and stability stages, because those stages in the life cycle of a relationship are really about you reintegrating your sense of self effectively back into the relationship, so you can be more fully seen, more fully heard, understood, connected. And then that takes you out into a space where the relationship can thrive better, because you are fully brought in, and you can, you're being seen for all of your flaws and imperfections, and you're accepting your partner for all of theirs. And that's ultimately what takes us to like the ideal stage of a relationship, being the bliss stage, where we love somebody and we feel infatuation with them, but it's all of them. It's not the honeymoon phase where we're on our best behavior and we're still learning each other. It's like really our deep truth. And so that's sort of the stage that everybody is ideally moving towards and or gunning for. But sometimes we have to take like a step back in order to take more steps forward. Sometimes we have to go through a little bit of the rockiness and the power struggle stage and the stability where it feels like love isn't this, high and this crazy excitement and there's all this, emotion all the time. And that can be really confusing for the anxious preoccupied, because this individual is like, if things feel like they're slipping away, I'm losing the relationship. It's not a progression. They can't see it that way. It feels like a loss. And so this is something so important to make peace with and understand in your mind if you're looking to have a long-term relationship that really lasts. Because if we resist the natural progression of the relationship life cycle, if we resist the power struggle stage or the stability stage, which are really about bringing ourselves into the relationship, having boundaries, learning to show our flaws, be imperfect, have more time alone, and like reconnect to ourselves again after this high of the honeymoon phase. If we resist those phases, then we're resisting allowing the relationship to progress in the natural way that it needs to reach that bliss phase. So it's very important. So the AA gets confused, right? Because they can start feeling like there's this high sensitivity and this hypervigilance specifically around abandonment. And this can create these protest behaviors, right? And those protest behaviors are not necessarily as intense as the fearful avoidant, but they can be, calling all the time or trying to hold on a lot and trying to cling a little bit when they feel like there's this, the infatuation is lowering. Just the idea that the infatuation is lowering and that the honeymoon phase can end, which it usually does, around 1.5 to 2.5 years, really like 2-year mark tends to be the latest, but there are outliers that can be around 2.5 years. So what happens is if we resist that and we're like, oh no, this is bad, infatuation lowering cannot take place, then what happens, right? Like we start self-sabotaging without meaning to as people. It's like, oh, infatuation can be lowered, so I have to cause some kind of turmoil or something, or test the relationship, or question my partner, or become a little bit suspicious, or try to make them jealous, or cling even more, or do all of these things that are actually more likely to cause harm to the relationship long term. And so you can think of this as really being that the anxious preoccupied gets their attachment style being activated, that fear of abandonment wound, being confused with what love is. Now, real love and what love is supposed to feel like, and I'm not saying that you aren't really loving somebody if you're also feeling that too. That's not true. Like you can really love somebody and feel that simultaneously and really have deep feelings and care. But sometimes we're not loving in the healthiest way that we could be as human beings when our attachment style is activated, because that can lead to toxic behavior or things that accidentally split the relationship apart. And to a certain degree, even though we are clinging to a person, even though we're, holding on so tight, and that's what anxious preoccupieds can do sometimes, that doesn't mean that that's the healthiest expression of love. Fear of loss is not the healthiest expression, especially if somebody's communicating a boundary, which can sometimes happen. Sometimes people need a little bit more space through the life cycle of a relationship, or need a little bit more time. And if we're not able, because we're so triggered by the fear, if we're not able to see that somebody else needs that space, and we're not able to respect their boundaries, we're kind of selfishly choosing our fear over loving them, right? We're responding, not meaning to, of course, and not because we're bad or anything like that, but choosing that triggering state and sort of buying into that state and letting that overpower what a boundary is that somebody might set up. Like, hey, I need a little bit more time, and we're not respecting that person to a certain degree. So that can happen with anxious preoccupied. I do see that. Of course, that's not always the case, and of course, it's not always so intense, but sometimes that fear can become selfish to a certain degree because we stop our ability to truly see and hear and understand others. Now, there are also people who are not seeing, hearing, and understanding you, who can also be different insecure attachment styles that aren't able to meet you where you're at and meet your needs and all these sorts of things. So we need to sort of have this balance and awareness of both. And so what's so important for the anxious preoccupied when they're trying to love properly and love fully and have this health in their relationship dynamic is to be able to take themselves into consideration as well as what their partner is saying into consideration at the same time. And usually for the anxious, like the dating stage goes quite well. Although sometimes they can self-sabotage there a little bit too, because they can be ready to cling to sort of like commit faster and hold on tighter, whereas other attachment styles in the different stages of relationships respond very differently in the dating phase and often need a lot more time. And so, what does that do? That can also make the anxious preoccupied perceive that as a sense of being unloved. Like, oh, I'm ready to settle down. You're not. You must not care for me as much as I care for you. And that's not always the case. The person can be just as interested, if not more, but have a different way of going about that thing, right? It's like saying, two people are going to run a marathon and one person's running it in like sprints and the other person's sort of training by jogging. And, the sprinting person might look like they're working harder initially, but, maybe the person who's jogging and shows up more consistently and more slowly cares just as much about their training process. It's kind of a silly analogy, to be honest, because like obviously you're going to train and jog longer distances if you're training for a marathon instead of as a sprinter, but you get the point, I think, right? So the anxious preoccupied is very sensitive to rejection as well. And sometimes they can stay in relationships and sort of get like, for lack of a better analogy again, hypnotized in a way into trying to solve the problem and crack the code of getting their partner to show up for them and love them completely and stay with them consistently. And sometimes anxious preoccupied stay in unhealthy relationship dynamics longer than they should, or longer than even they have really strong feelings for, because they kind of get addicted to this intermittent reinforcement, just like gambling, right? Of the partner, like sometimes being there, sometimes not being there. And so again, that's another symptom of like the attachment style being activated and confusing that with love. And so what love should really feel like, the healthiest expression of love should feel like two people are honest, they're open, they're seeing each other's faults. And this is like as we progress, not just honeymoon phase, but like later into the relationship dynamic. There are deep roots built of trust because you're both communicating and working through things together as a unit. And the love should feel more like a fulfillment, like a deep fulfillment and peace and excitement, but not from this like fear-based kind of excitement. Like, is it going to work? Is it not going to work? Are they going to call? Are they not going to call? Not from a triggered space, but like a joyous sort of feeling. And so you can tell a little bit just by thinking that out, like where you're at in the relationship is, you can tell if it's your attachment style being activated or more like deep rooted, pure kind of healthy love. If you experience more rocky road type of love, that excitement, but nervousness and sort of fear, versus that like joy and openness and trust and depth of commitment and interaction and those deeper roots that are building. And eventually the fulfillment outweighs that like pleasure seeking type experience we get from the honeymoon phase and the heightened neurochemicals and all that kind of stuff. But that's a good way of sort of tuning in to see where you're at, because that can be how we, as the anxious preoccupied, I'm not that attachment style by nature or by reprogramming, but, I relate very much because I was fearful avoidant with an anxious side. So it's easy to sort of have that revved up attachment style thing going on, and that can be very confusing, and that can really halt your progression from moving into the power struggle stage. So a couple things you really want to do, and I talk about this a lot in our advanced anxious attachment style courses, like stage by stage, really breaking them down, but you really want to learn your boundaries. Like, what are your boundaries as a person? What are your needs in a relationship? And you really want to question your expectations, okay? It's easy to expect that somebody's going to love the way that you love. It's easy to be like, well, this is what I want, and so obviously this is what the other person would want, because we tend as human beings to sort of project from our perspective. So it's like, if love for me means being together 24/7, how could it possibly be that way be different for somebody else? How could it possibly be that somebody doesn't want to be together 24/7? And it's easy to make that mean in your mind that they're rejecting you, when really it could be about the life cycle of relationship and different patterns changing. So it's really important to define how much time and space you think is appropriate in a relationship from a conscious perspective. Like, is it okay if we only spend 3 or 4 days a week together? or even 2 days together, if we're both really present, like, are those things okay for our lifestyle, what's going on in the relationship dynamic? And then if you get that pull coming in, that temptation to tell that narrative that, oh, this person doesn't want to spend more than 2 or 3 days together, and it means they're falling out of love with me, or they're going to abandon me, or if that narrative can come alive, if you've had this conscious conversation ahead of time with your partner about what's working and what doesn't, and what amount of time is going to be workable to spend together according to your lifestyles, then you can sort of separate, fact from fiction a little bit. You can sort of go, okay, well, we've said, 2 or 3 days together is enough. And so I don't have room. It's not the healthy thing for me to panic right now and tell this narrative that the person's abandoning me, because we've talked about this and we've said that this is healthy. So I'll go into a lot of strategies because I have so many things I'm like trying to get out at the same time, but there's so many things to say about this. I'll go into some strategies in a next video, so stay tuned for that. But if you have any questions or you want to learn more about this, feel free to join our school and use the coupon code that's posted in the description below, or just leave some comments about what else you want to see in next videos, and I will see you there. Thank you so much for watching.